Joining me now, Judiciary Committee member, Rhode Island Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Senator, your sense of what it's going to take to actually move those of your Republican colleagues who remain persuadable on Blanche's nomination?
I would say one of two things. One would be a sense of real uncertainty, even horror, at the way that Blanche is operating the Department of Justice, and concern that if that continues in a new administration, Republicans could be the victim of a malignant Department of Justice. However, we've seen our colleagues have real trouble finding their spines with that kind of a concern, on principle or on the merits. So the second concern is how rotten Blanche is and continues to be or becomes in the months ahead between now and November. They're looking at a very challenging election. They're looking at a deeply unpopular and flawed president. And they're worried about how much Trump baggage they have to carry into the election. And every single one of the Republican senators who's up for election is going to be looking at Blanche and saying, what is this guy going to do between now and November that I'm going to have to answer for? And if you look at his track record to date, there's an enormous amount of reason for fear and anxiety that he's going to continue to do disgraceful things that they will then be accountable for having voted for him.
And is it your sense that the speech that the president has teased for Thursday night brings those concerns into starker relief for your Republican colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely. I have warned Republican colleagues who I'm friendly with, look, somewhere back in his brain, Donald Trump knows that he's a failed president, that his numbers are terrible and getting worse, and that his Iran war, his economic strategy, everything he's touched has become a disaster. He can't be unaware of that. He's a con man and a liar, so he proceeds as if that weren't true, but somewhere in his mind, he has to know that. And what I warn them is that this is a guy who would rather tear down the entire Republican Party with him than fail alone. And so continuing to force obeisance and obsequiousness about these wild conspiracy theories about ridiculous appointments like this guy Pulte at DNI, over and over again, he's upping the load and the burden that Republicans have to carry into the election. And at some point comes what I call the blazing saddles moment, where in the movie, the governor says to his cronies, okay, boys, it's time we started looking out for our own phony baloney jobs. And that moment could well come.
What a reference, given that just yesterday we had a Godfather reference courtesy of Nancy Mace. Listen, you have like a bona fide cornucopia of issues that you could go over with Blanche, whether it's the weaponization fund, whether it is his handling of the Epstein files, whether it is the prosecution of perceived political enemies. I just wonder what you think is actually most effective here if the objective is to move one of your handful of your Republican colleagues.
Yeah, I think if you look at, for instance, Senator Tillis has said very plainly that people who deny January 6th and are sympathetic to the rioters who beat up police officers, that's a red line for him. Grassley might be concerned about the failure of this administration to produce information. He's always been a kind of, open books transparency kind of guy. Cornyn has already expressed concerns. He's a former attorney general himself about the way in which Blanche has conducted himself. And all the way down the dais, you have Senator Moody, who is in a head-to-head race in Florida for her seat from Alex Vindman, and who does not need extra baggage going into that election if Blanche continues to misbehave after she's voted for him. So there are a number of ways to get this. And then you get to the floor and you have to face, all the other senators who now have to pledge themselves to supporting Blanche despite his history of terrible behavior.
It's interesting that you throw Moody into the mix. That has been much less reported. So there's all the Republican senators. I wonder for you, though, Is there any assurance Blanche can give you tomorrow, any commitment that's going to convince you that the president's personal attorney can ever be refashioned into an attorney for the people?
In his case, I just don't see it. There's just too much of a track record. And we've heard him make these promises before. When he came in for his confirmation, he said, oh, no, there's going to be absolutely no weaponization. Everything's going to be on the up and up. I'm not going to run out people from the department for having, participated and been assigned to cases where Trump was on the other side of the V from the United States. And he broke just all of those promises. So his word is not credible with me.
I want to talk about a new announcement you made this weekend. It's about whistleblowers alleging several construction problems at the Kennedy Center. They say the center rushed its renovations, that they cut corners, all to please the president. What more can you tell us about this and what you think happens next?
Well, this is just part of a trajectory of malfeasance at the Kennedy Center since Trump's cronies took it over. It began as kind of a mob bust out. They're going to go in and run the place themselves and pay themselves and their cronies money and put big charges for fancy meals and drinks on the account of the senator and, treat themselves to Watergate hotel hospitality. And it was all going to be fun and games. But then they realized that they'd screwed up the bust out. And they killed the institution because nobody wanted to come and perform there any longer because it had become so toxic and poisonous. So then they had to pretend that there was a construction problem, that they needed to close it as a cover up for the fact that they had really shut it down through incompetence. And so it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Thank you to Representative Beatty for her work, getting a court decision saying that the decision to close was not well-founded and needed to be redone by the board. And now we just see over and over again these little things, but it's got its own reflecting pool. And they've screwed up that reflecting pool too. It's covered in rust, it's empty, they didn't do it.
Senator, I've only got about 30 seconds left, but I do want to ask you, with the passing of Senator Lindsey Graham, with the absence of Senator McConnell, it feels to those of us on the outside like this is an institution that is very much in flux. And I wonder if it feels the same way sitting in that chamber.
Yeah, margins are very, very close right now. And I think I just personally am going to miss Lindsey Graham a lot. He was a very boisterous, cheerful, adventurous, spirited member who was very eager to work with Democrats. And there's a lot of stuff that we were working on where I'm now going to have to look around and try to find a Republican to go along. And it's going to be much, much harder. Lindsey was kind of unique, and we're going to miss him.